HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Western Front, A History of the Great War, 1914 to 1918, by Nick Lloyd. Read by Mark Elstob.
Cast of Characters. Albert I, King of the Belgians, 1875 to 1934. Assumed command of the Belgian army in August 1914 and spent the remainder of the war with his men in a small lodgment behind the Yser River. Allenby, General Sir Edmund Henry Heineman, 1861 to 1936. Commanded the British Cavalry Division in 1914 before taking charge of the Third Army 1915 to 1917. Transferred to the Egyptian Expeditionary Force in June 1917. Asquith, Herbert Henry, 1852 to 1928. Liberal Party politician and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, 1908 to 1916. Baden, Prince Maximilian Alexander Friedrich Wilhelm von, 1867 to 1929. Honorary President of the Baden branch of the German Red Cross, who was appointed Imperial Chancellor on the 3rd of October 1918. Baker, Newton Deal, 1871 to 1937. U.S. Secretary of War, 1916 to 1921. Balfour, Arthur James, 1st Earl of Balfour, 1848 to 1930. Conservative politician who was appointed First Lord of the Admiralty in May 1915 and Foreign Secretary the following year. Bauer, Colonel Max Hermann, 1869 to 1929. Artillery expert who served throughout the war in the operations section of the German Supreme Command. Bayern, Crown Prince Ruprecht Maria Luitpold Ferdinand von, 1869 to 1955. Heir to the throne of Bavaria. Commanded the German 6th Army 1914 to 1916 and Army Group Ruprecht, 1916 to 1918. Below, General Fritz Wilhelm Theodor Karl von, 1853 to 1918. Replaced Karl von Bülow at the German Second Army in 1915 until he moved to command First Army in 1916. Appointed to 9th Army in June 1918. Below, General Otto Ernst Vincent Leo von, 1857 to 1944. Served on the Eastern Front, in the Balkans and on the Italian Front between 1914 and 1917. Brought back to the Western Front in February 1918 after his time in Italy to take charge of the German 17th Army. Berg-Markienen, Friedrich Wilhelm Bernhard von, 1866 to 1939. President of East Prussia who was appointed Chief of the Kaiser's Civil Cabinet in January 1918. Bettmann-Hollweg, Theobald Theodor Friedrich Alfred von, 1856 to 1921. German Imperial Chancellor, 1909 to 1917. Bliss, General Tasker Howard, 1853 to 1930. Chief of Staff of the United States Army, 1917 to 1918. Assigned to the Supreme War Council as American Permanent Military Representative in November 1917. Bourne, General Max Ferdinand Karl von, 1850 to 1921. Commander of the German 7th Army, 1915 to 1918. Promoted to Army Group Command in August 1918. Briand, Aristide Pierre-Henri, 1862 to 1932. French statesman and politician who served as Prime Minister between October 1915 and March 1917. Bülow, Field Marshal Karl Wilhelm Paul von, 1846 to 1921. Commander of the German Second Army, 1914 to 1915, who was briefly tasked with coordinating First and Third Armies in August 1914. suffered a heart attack in March 1915. Byng, Honourable General Sir Julian Hedworth George, 1862 to 1935. Commander of the British Third Army, 1917 to 1918. Castelnau, General Noël Édouard Marie Joseph Curie de, 1851 to 1944. Commander of the French Second Army, 1914 to 1915, and Army Group Centre, 1915. Recalled from retirement in December 1916 to command Army Group East. Churchill, Winston Leonard Spencer, 1874 to 1965. First Lord of the Admiralty, 1911 to 1915, who resigned from government in October 1915. Served as Minister of Munitions, 1917 to 1918. Clemenceau, Georges Eugène Benjamin, 1841 to 1929. French senator and member of the Senate Army Commission who was appointed Prime Minister on the 16th of November 1917. Konrad von Hötzendorf, Field Marshal Franz Xaver Joseph Graf, 1852 to 1925. Chief of the General Staff of the Austro-Hungarian Army and Navy, 1906 to 1917. Curzon, Lord George Nathaniel, 1st Marquess Curzon of Kedleston, 1859 to 1925. British statesman and former Viceroy of India, 1898 to 1905, who served as Lord Privy Seal, 1915 to 1916, and Leader of the House of Lords, 1916 to 1924. Dmitri, General Antoine, 1857 to 1924. French cavalry officer who commanded a Northern Army detachment in Flanders in April and May 1918. Dubai, General Augustin Yvon Edmond, 1851 to 1934. Commander of the French First Army, 1914, and Army Group East, 1915 to 1916. Duchesne, General Denis Auguste, 1862 to 1950. Commander of the French 10th Army, 1916 to 1917, and 6th Army, 1917 to 1918. Relieved of command in June 1918. Durbal, General Victor Louis Lucien, 1858 to 1943. Cavalry officer who commanded the French 8th Army, 1914 to 1915, and 10th Army, 1915 to 1916. Einem, General Karl Wilhelm Georg August von, 1853 to 1934. Commander of the German Third Army between September 1914 and November 1918. Emich, General Albert Theodor Otto von, 1848 to 1915. Led a task force that captured Liège in August 1914. Erzberger, Matthias, 1875 to 1921. German Catholic Centre Party politician who was part of the first parliamentary government formed in October 1918. Led the armistice delegation at Compiègne. Falkenhausen, General Ludwig Alexander Friedrich August Philipp von, 1844 to 1936. Commander of the German 6th Army, 1916 to 1917. Appointed Governor-General of Belgium in April 1917. Falkenhayn, General Erich Georg Sebastian Anton, 1861 to 1922. Prussian Minister of War, 1913 to 1915, and Chief of the General Staff, 1914 to 1916. After being relieved of command in August 1916, he was appointed Commander of 9th Army in Romania and led Army Group F in Turkey. Fayolle, General Marie-Émile, 1852 to 1928. Recalled from retirement in 1914 to divisional command before replacing Pétain at 33rd Corps in 1915. Served as commander of 6th Army, 1916, and 1st Army, 1916 to 1917. Took charge of Reserve Army Group in March 1918. Ferry. Abel Jules Edouard, 1881 to 1918. French politician and soldier. Became Under-Secretary for Foreign Affairs in 1914 before serving at the front with his regiment in 1914 to 1915. Mortally wounded by shell fire in September 1918 while inspecting the front. Foch. Marshal Ferdinand, 1851 to 1929. Led the French 20th Corps in August 1914 and was quickly promoted to 9th Army, 1914, and Army Group North, 1915 to 1916. Appointed Army Chief of Staff, May 1917, and Supreme Allied Commander, April 1918. Franchet d'Espèrey. General Louis-Félix Marie-François Franchet, 1856 to 1942. Commander of the French 1st Corps, 1914, and took charge of 5th Army before the Battle of the Marne. Served as Commander of Army Group East, 1916, and Army Group North, 1916 to 1918. French. Field Marshal Sir John Denton Pinkston, 1852 to 1925. Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force, 1914 to 1915. Returned home in December 1915 to take charge of Home Forces. Served as Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, 1918 to 1921. Gallieni. General Joseph Simon, 1849 to 1916. Decorated colonial soldier recalled from retirement in 1914 to become military governor of Paris. Served as Minister of War between October 1915 and March 1916. Gallwitz. General Max Karl Wilhelm von, 1852 to 1937. Appointed commander of the German Second Army on the Somme in July 1916, while also taking charge of Army Group Gallwitz. Subsequently commanded 5th Army, 1916 to 1918. Gough. General Sir Hubert de la Poer, 1870 to 1963. Commander of the British Reserve Army, later renamed 5th Army, 1916 to 1918. Dismissed after the collapse of 5th Army on the 27th of March, 1918. Giraud. General Henri-Joseph Eugène, 1867 to 1946. Commander of the French Expeditionary Corps at the Dardanelles, where he was wounded and had to have his right arm amputated. Commander of the French 4th Army, 1917 to 1918. Groener. General Karl Eduard Wilhelm, 1867 to 1939. Head of the railway section of the German General Staff in 1914, before moving to the War Ministry in 1916. Replaced Ludendorff as First Quartermaster General in October 1918. Haig. Field Marshal Sir Douglas, 1861 to 1928. Went to war with the British First Corps, later taking charge of 1st Army, 1915. Replaced Sir John French as Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force in December 1915. Onchy. Maurice Pascal Allaire, 1877 to 1963. Secretary of the Committee of Imperial Defence, who served successively as Secretary to the Dardanelles Committee, War Committee and War Cabinet between 1914 and 1918. Harbord. Brigadier General James Guthrie, 1866 to 1947. Appointed Chief of Staff to General Pershing in April 1917. Took charge of U.S. 4 Marine Brigade in June 1918. Hausen. General Max Clemens Lothar Freiherr von, 1846 to 1922. Commanded the Royal Saxon Army, 3rd Army, on the outbreak of war. Relieved from duty in September 1914 owing to illness. Hertling. Georg, Graf von 1843 to 1919. Delegate for the Catholic Centre Party in the Reichstag, appointed Imperial Chancellor and Prime Minister of Prussia on the 1st of November 1917. Resigned on the 3rd of October 1918. Hindenburg, Paul Ludwig Hans Anton von Beneckendorf und von 1847 to 1934. Brought out of retirement in August 1914 to take charge of the German 8th Army in East Prussia. Replaced Falkenhayn as Chief of the General Staff in August 1916. Hintze, Paul von 1864 to 1941. Former German naval officer and diplomat who served as ambassador to China 1914 and Norway 1917 before being appointed Foreign Secretary in July 1918. Hohenzollern, Crown Prince Friedrich Wilhelm Victor August Ernst, 1882 to 1951. Eldest son of the Kaiser. Took charge of the German 5th Army in August 1914 before commanding Army Group Crown Prince, 1917 to 1918. Hohenzollern, Kaiser Friedrich Wilhelm Victor Albert, Wilhelm II, 1859 to 1941. German Emperor, King of Prussia, who reigned from 1888 to 1918. Abdicated on the 9th of November 1918. Holzendorf, Admiral Henning Rudolf Adolf Karl von 1853 to 1919. Uncompromising proponent of unrestricted submarine warfare and Chief of the Admiralty General Staff, 1915 to 1918. House, Colonel Edward Mandel, 1858 to 1938. Advisor to President Wilson, who travelled to France in October 1918 as the President's personal representative. Outier, General Oscar Emil von 1857 to 1934. After serving on the Eastern Front, he was brought to France to command the newly formed 18th Army for the Spring Offensive, 1918. Jellicoe, Admiral of the Fleet Sir John Rushworth, 1859 to 1935. Appointed commander of the Royal Navy's Grand Fleet on the outbreak of war and led it at its most significant engagement at Jutland in May to June 1916. Served as First Sea Lord, 1916 to 1917. Joffre, Marshal Joseph-Jacques Césaire, 1852 to 1931. Appointed Chief of the French General Staff in 1911 and Commander-in-Chief on the outbreak of war. He resigned in December 1916 and led the French military mission to the United States the following year. Kitchener, Field Marshal Lord Horatio Herbert, 1850 to 1916. British Secretary of State for War, 1914 to 1916. Lost in the sinking of HMS Hampshire in June 1916. Kluck, General Alexander Heinrich Rudolf von 1846 to 1934. Commanded the German First Army, 1914 to 1915. Retired from active service in March 1915 after being wounded by shrapnel. Nobelsdorf, Konstantin Schmidt von 1860 to 1936. Chief of Staff of the German 5th Army, 1914 to 1916. Kuhl, Lieutenant General Hermann Josef von 1856 to 1958. Served in a variety of staff positions, including Chief of Staff of the German 1st Army, 1914, 12th Army and 6th Army, 1915. Assigned to Army Group Ruprecht as Chief of Staff, 1916 to 1918. Kuhlmann, Richard von 1873 to 1948. German Ambassador at Constantinople, 1916 to 1917, and Foreign Secretary, 1917 to 1918. L'Angle de Carré, General Fernand Louis Armand Marie II, 1849 to 1927. Commander of the French Fourth Army, 1914 to 1915, and Army Group Centre, 1915 to 1916. Lorezac, General Charles-Louis Marie, 1852 to 1925. Commander of the French Fifth Army in 1914. Sacked on the eve of the Battle of the Marne, 5th of September 1914. Lansing, Robert, 1864 to 1928. U.S. Secretary of State, 1915 to 1920. Lehman, General Gérard Mathieu Joseph Georges, 1851 to 1920. Commander of the fortifications surrounding Liège and 3rd Belgian Division. Taken prisoner at Fort de Lansin and held in captivity until 1917, when he was repatriated to Switzerland because of poor health. Liggett, General Hunter, 1857 to 1935. Commander of U.S. First Corps at the Second Battle of the Marne and Saint-Mihiel. Appointed Commander of U.S. First Army in October 1918. Lloyd George, David, 1863 to 1945. Liberal politician who was put in charge of the Ministry of Munitions in May 1915. Appointed Secretary of State for War after Kitchener's death in June 1916. Replaced Asquith as British Prime Minister in December 1916. Losberg, Colonel Friedrich Karl Fritz von, 1868 to 1942. German defensive expert who served in a variety of staff positions, including Chief of Staff at 3rd Army, 1915, 1st Army, 1916, 6th Army, 1917, 4th Army, 1917 to 1918, and Army Groups Bern and Duke Albrecht, 1918, known as the Lion of the Defensive. Ludendorff, General Erich Friedrich Wilhelm, 1865 to 1937. Served with the German Second Army in 1914 before being transferred to 8th Army in East Prussia. Appointed First Quartermaster General in August 1916. Resigned on the 26th of October 1918. Lyotet, Marshal Louis Hubert, 1854 to 1934. French Resident General of Morocco, 1912 to 1916, who was appointed Minister of War in December 1916. Resigned in March 1917. Mestre, General Paul-André Marie, 1858 to 1922. Appointed Commander of the French Sixth Army in May 1917. After briefly commanding French troops in Italy, he returned to the Western Front in 1918 to command 10th Army and, from July, Army Group Centre. Mangin, General Charles-Emmanuel Marie, 1866 to 1925. Colonial soldier who moved from Divisional and Corps Command, 1914 to 1916, to take charge of the French 6th Army in 1917. Dismissed after the Nivelles offensive, he returned to command 10th Army in June 1918 and led the counter-attacks at the Matz and the Marne. Marwitz, General Georg Cornelius Adalbert von der, 1856 to 1929. Cavalry officer who was appointed commander of the German Second Army in December 1916. Moved to command 5th Army in the Argonne in October 1918. Mauduit, General Louis Ernest de, 1857 to 1921. Commander of the French 10th Army, 1914 to 1915, and 7th Army, 1915. Demoted to Corps Commander before being relieved in June 1918. Maunery, General Michel Joseph, 1847 to 1923. Commander of the French 6th Army, 1914 to 1915. Retired from active service in March 1915 after being severely wounded by a sniper. Michaelis, Georg Max Ludwig, 1857 to 1936. Served as Imperial Chancellor and Prime Minister of Prussia between July and November 1917. Michelaer, General Joseph Alfred, 1861 to 1931. Commander of the French 10th Army, 1916, before being appointed to Reserve Army Group for the Nivelle Offensive. Mirande, Etienne Alexandre, 1859 to 1943. French Minister of War, 1914 to 1915. Milner, Alfred, Viscount, 1854 to 1925. Colonial Administrator and member of the War Cabinet, 1916 to 1918. Appointed Secretary of State for War in April 1918. Moltke, Colonel General Helmut Johann Ludwig von, 1848 to 1916. Chief of the General Staff, 1906 to 1914, and one of the architects of the German War Plan of 1914. Replaced on the 14th of September 1914 by Falkenhayn. Nivelle, General Robert Georges, 1856 to 1924. Artillery officer who was appointed commander of the French Second Army at Verdun in May 1916. Succeeded Joffre as commander-in-chief and masterminded the Nivelle offensive in the spring of 1917. Dismissed on the 15th of May 1917. Painlevé, Paul, 1863 to 1933. Respected mathematician who was head of the Inventions Committee at the French Ministry of War. Appointed Minister of War in March 1917 and formed a government between September and November 1917. Pershing, General John Joseph, 1860 to 1948. Commander-in-Chief of the American Expeditionary Force. Pétain, Marshal Henri-Philippe Benoni-Omer, 1856 to 1951. Commander of the French 33rd Corps during the fighting in Artois, 1915, and appointed to Second Army in July 1915. Promoted to Army Group Centre in May 1916. Succeeded Nivelle as Commander-in-Chief in May 1917. Plessen, General Hans-Georg Hermann von, 1841 to 1929. Close friend of and advisor to the Kaiser. Served as Commandant of OHL and His Majesty's Adjutant General, 1914 to 1918. Plumer, General Sir Herbert Charles Onslow, 1857 to 1932. Commander of the British Second Army, 1915 to 1918. Poincaré, Raymond Nicolas Landry, 1860 to 1934. President of the French Republic, 1913 to 1920. Rawlinson, General Sir Henry Seymour, 1861 to 1925. Commander of the British Fourth Army, 1916 to 1918. Ribot, Alexandre Félix Joseph, 1842 to 1923. French Finance Minister, 1914 to 1917, who formed a short-lived government between March and September 1917. Richthofen, Captain Manfred Albrecht Freiherr von, 1892 to 1918. Renowned German fighter pilot and leader of Jagdgeschwader 2, shot down and killed in action on the 21st of April 1918. Robertson, General Sir William Robert, 1860 to 1933. Quartermaster General and Chief of Staff to the British Expeditionary Force, 1914 to 1915. Served as Chief of the Imperial General Staff, 1915 to 1918. Roch, General Pierre Auguste, 1856 to 1920. French Minister of War between March and December 1916. Schulenburg, General Friedrich Bernhard Karl Gustav Ulrich Erich Graf von der, 1865 to 1939. cavalry officer who was appointed Chief of Staff to Army.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?